Hello and welcome to Walker Tea Review. I'm Jason Walker, and with the coming of the new year, people are talking about turning over new leaves, and that's what we have here today, are new leaves to look at. So let's go ahead and talk about this green tea. Something to keep in mind with the spring harvest coming up, starting around the end of March, beginning of April in China and in Japan as well. Be thinking in your mind, well, if I don't want this tea, do I want a 2011, a fresh version, a fresh tea, a new arrival that could be coming out? Now what you see I'm doing here is I'm taking this green with my spoon. I'm just getting enough to really coat the bottom, say 1.5 inch diameter of this. This is about a 4-ounce gaiwan, so that should be enough tea. My water's been brought to a very an early boil. You see bubbles coming up, but you don't get that rolling boil. In Chinese, there were different levels before they were able to measure temperature accurately with a thermometer. They talked about crab eyes, fish eyes to describe the size of the bubbles and the activity that's going on in boiling water. So that gives us enough water, because I do want enough. Let me get this out of the way. I do want enough water so that when I put my lid on, I'm getting a nice water level above the rim that creates a kind of seal. I'm going to gently slide that over and let that sit. That seal prevents air from getting in and affecting the color. As a tea sits out, especially with green teas, you'll notice that they can transfer or change from a brighter, greener color to a duller, flatter, yellowish type color. We want to prevent that. So while the tea is steeping for a moment here, let's talk about this tea. This is from Mark T. Wendell Tea Company. This is their TripleCup green tea. You can find a 4-ounce size like this one available currently for $11.50. It is from the Zhejiang province, from that area, Zhejiang province in China. So that's along the eastern coastal area, or at least the province is. And that's really all the information we have about this tea. It's not limited, it's not specified as to one season or necessarily limited to one particular harvest. So, set this aside. Well, before I do that, I should talk about our dry leaf, our wet leaf, and our liquor. Now our bubbles have kind of, the heat trapped, or the air trapped under the lid here, under the top of the dome of the lid, has started to expand and is now trying to escape, so it's pushed my lid around a little bit. I'm just going to set it back on there. Let's talk about this dry leaf now. First off, there's a rich green vegetable sweet smell, and it's coming off as something kind of like a fresh green kale or a green cabbage. There's something kind of sweet about it right now. So that's a nice fragrance coming off. Very pleasant. Let's look at the leaves though as well. You'll notice, for one thing, that these are quite curly. They're as far as color goes, they are more of a greenish or a blue-green, moving over even towards a kind of a gray color. You'll see that they're curled into, they're kind of wrapped up like curly Q, squiggly, different shapes there. They are fairly thin. They're not a very thick, coarse like an oolong that's from Fujian, like a Da Hong Pao, something like that. That's a longer, broader, thicker leaves. These are smaller than that. We're seeing them around 1 inch for an average, I would say, as far as the size goes. Several that are smaller. Actually, maybe 3/4 of an inch for the average, because a lot of these are smaller, a little more tender. At the same time, they don't have that very extremely small needle-like appearance about them. They don't necessarily look like the very finest, smallest needles. They don't see a lot of fuzz or hair on any needle types. Although as I reach in, I do occasionally find needle-like or a tip here and there. Just pulled one out here, just by chance, really. So that really kind of covers. These are not the most tender, finest needles. They're not the small. They're not largely oversized leaves either. They're somewhere in the middle. Okay, so that takes care of our dry leaf. Let's go ahead and give this a pour so we can talk a little bit about our wet leaf. Should have had enough time to steep now. If you are steeping and preparing this as you watch a video, keep in mind that you can pause and make your own notes, but you don't want to pause too long because that can affect steep times. For example, as we drink, the liquor can cool, and the variations in the temperature can affect what flavors come out or how strong those flavors are, or other things like aftertaste as well. So I'm going to set that aside and come back to that in just a moment, because I just want to kind of look at that color there for a moment. But let's go ahead and talk about this wet leaf. Okay, you still get some of the sweet notes that I talked about, something like a lightly steamed, more like a kale green, not a heavy turnip green, over boiled type turnip green, but there is something that's light. Combined with that, you are getting the heat, the toasting element, the firing aspects that are involved in processing this tea. You're getting something that's kind of almost nutty. Think of roasted cashew lightly, combined with something more like a lima bean, like a canned boiled lima bean. There's something kind of beany coming out. Actually, more beany than nutty, actually. But again, it's a green bean. It's a lima, so it's got some of those green notes coming off of it as well. Okay, looking at this leaf, let me kind of get the lid clear here from these portions that we had. Let me pull out an example of one of the larger leaf sections here. This is about 3/4 of an inch to an inch in width. Larger sized leaf portion there. I'll return that to the pot and or the bowl rather. And you're also getting leaf section, so I'm pulling out here, which was connected to a very tender, delicate branch or stem, you could say, there. Let me pull out a few more. Here's another tender leaf, hasn't fully unfurled, indicating that it's going to unfurl later in subsequent steeping. So that indicates that you haven't used up all your flavors and aromas in that first cup or that first steep there. Okay, so you do have a lot of light, small leaves there. You do have some stem portions there as well, so I'm pulling out that one. And I'd say that's fairly representative. You're not seeing a lot of oxidation. I've just noticed the piece here and there had a little tinge of red on the edges of it, but that's pretty infrequent. But it's definitely not the norm. And yeah, you're getting middle-sized, medium-sized leaves, say in comparison to a larger, like I said, a oolong, but it's not as fine as a dragon well, the leaves, the needles and tips on something like that. Okay, so there we go. That gives us our view of our wet leaf there. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about our liquor. We talked about this. We noted this color. It's a pretty. One thing I noticed, it's a pretty thick, cloudy type of liquor. There's a lot of particles floating around in there. It's fairly yellow. It's not. I'm just looking at this in different lights, and it's not a. It's more of a dark yellow rather than a green yellow. Although very faint light green yellow, mostly just a dark yellow though. It's not the most bright that I've seen. Again, more of the heat notes coming out here. Something more beany, lima bean coming out. Heavily boiled lima bean type smells. Let's give it a shot though. Talked about the taste and the aromas here. Things that I note, there's still that strong beany type component. Think white beans, boiled white beans, think again lima. So those components are there. The second thing I notice, there is some sweetness, and it's a bit of a kind of a lighter, freshly chopped spinach type of sweetness in there. At the same time, you've got a pretty strong astringent level, so it does hit the mouth, especially the front and sides of the tongue. Really kind of draws it up, creates a astringent, drying type feel there. There is some aftertaste, and that's what I'm looking for now. There's some aftertaste again, continuing that kind of beany note, but it can be difficult. It can be a little more difficult to focus on it because there's so much astringency going on here right now. Okay. Although the aftertaste, that sweetness does build to a certain extent. But you really have to kind of be patient to let the astringency die down and let that sweetness build up. Okay, so as one falls, the other kind of rises. You become more aware of it in the process. So, looking at this tea as a whole, I would probably give this tea an 84. This is, and I hate to say this, but this is not the kind of tea that you want to try if you are new to Chinese green teas. And the reason being is that this one is not that representative of the general class of good quality Chinese greens. This one is something that you may have, if you had tried it and said, oh, I don't like this, therefore I don't like green tea or Chinese green teas, then you are doing yourself a disservice. If you know you like green teas, and you find something that you want to just use as a maybe a lower cost daily use type of tea, you may be able to get by with this. So come back to Walker Tea Review, because teas are about experience. We're looking at loose leaf teas in their pure form and knowing when and how to use the teas to get the most enjoyment from them.